My stepdad tortured me for 10 years and I refused to keep silent. I 27M survived intrafamilial child torture by the hands of my stepdad and mother growing up. My mom didn't have a great mother herself, so she didn't exactly have the best example on how to parent. My family has a long line of abusers, pedophiles, incestuous activity, and more. So you can imagine how fucked up everyone is. My mom made a lot of horrible decisions when she had me like dating abusive men with anger issues. One man in particular became my stepdad, and he was the worst of the worst. It all started when I was just 6 years old. One day some random, bulky, built, tall man with dark hair moved into our home and started to drill into my head that he was my new stepdad, since my real dad didn't love me, but that he does. I'll refer to him as Jay. I've never seen this man before in my life, yet the first time meeting me Jay already tried to set narratives before developing any form of bond with me. I don't even remember being introduced to him prior. Control was his main obsession since day one, and ever since he came into my life, he made sure I only existed to be his puppet. Him and my mom used me being on the spectrum to try and justify everything they did to me, and would belittle me and punish me for having autistic meltdowns, or whenever I'd become understandably overstimulated. When Jay moved in, I was quickly introduced to his niece. That is when I learned how to inappropriately touch myself. She taught me how, and I mimicked her. She was only 11 and I was 6. This is when Jay's most sinister plan first got introduced. The camera in my room. Jay convinced my mom that I was a danger to society, and to myself, and must be monitored 24/7. So Jay and my mom packed up all my toys, took my bed frame, and left only a mattress on the floor. The camera was a little gray square box, with a thick, black cord that lined down my wall, leading to the living room where Jay had a mini TV and he would watch me. That camera stayed in my room until I escaped. I was heavily neglected, so I was never taught how to tie my shoes, brush my hair, my teeth, or anything that had to do with taking care of myself. However, I knew how to clean a house until it was spotless ever since I was 8 years old. I don't remember my mom ever hugging me, or saying she loved me. She just always seemed irritable and ready to bite my head off. I was so neglected from affection that I remember in preschool I faked an injury just so the nice office lady could tend to me, and give me gentle attention. Looking back now, I can see how wrong and embarrassing this was. However, it was just a product of a completely unloved child, that yearned for nurturing. My mom and Jay never had to do any house or yard work, because they had me doing it all every single day. If I didn't comply, if I got bad grades, if I demanded any form of privacy or desire to have self-will, Jay would punish me. I remember being hit almost daily and not even knowing over what. Jay had intense anger issues and it was constantly being taken out on me. He would spank me with objects, but mainly his hand, until it made sitting down unbearable. He'd make me write self-degrading sentences by the hundreds. I was heavily isolated and wasn't allowed to have friends over, or go to their houses, so I never saw how other parents were with their kids. Jay monitored what movies I watched, what music I listened to, how I dressed, how I spoke, how I acted, who I was friends with at school. He made sure to befriend a lot of parents, and seemed like this outstanding saint of a man that took in a kid as if they were his own. Jay would often use scare tactics on me, like showing me the TV show, Beyond Scared Straight, and then threaten to throw me in a place like that to make me act right. He'd even go as far as fake calling the cops on me, and forcing me to sit with him in the kitchen, both of us waiting to hear sirens, with that look on his face, while I sobbed and had panic attacks. He would often belittle me and call me names, his favorite being the R word. For my 11th birthday, I got a hamster who I instantly grew attached to. I had him for 2 years, and he was my baby. I came home from school one day and found him deceased in his cage, on the kitchen table, and Jay waiting to greet me. I'll never forget the way he grinned at me when I began to uncontrollably cry. He told me that it was my fault, and he had to teach me a lesson. My biological father had custody of me every other weekend, which was court-ordered. Jay would come out and lie saying I was at a friend's house, making my dad leave. The times I was able to get away and go to my dad's, I was too excited to even think about the abuse at home. I just loved being in the same room as my dad, even though all he'd do is drink and play Counter-Strike, and not acknowledge my existence. But as the years went by, I started to believe Jay's words that my dad didn't love me. I always saw my dad as my potential savior, the one that takes me away from Jay every other weekend. I told my dad the things that went on at home, and I don't even think he believed me. His reply was, "You need someone like him. You just don't like that he's strict?" I've been depressed ever since I was 8, but this threw me into a deep depression, and I started to believe I wasn't a good person, and was straight up cursed. That I deserved everything Jay, my mom, and my dad did to me. That I was cursed to be an unlovable, motherless, fatherless child. I started to fail almost every class I was in, and didn't pay attention much. I spent time doodling, or writing instead of learning. I was forced into counseling because of this, but I wasn't allowed to tell her anything. So I was telling this poor lady a graphic story about a ghost that haunts my house, and it physically hurts me, and scares me, hoping she would get it and look into it. Something. She didn't. She was convinced I was just a strange and unusual kid, and she stopped seeing me. I remember one day my history teacher called home because I was sobbing in class. We were learning about the history of how slaves were tortured, and how horrible they were treated. I just remember not being able to breathe, and uncontrollably crying over the details. Jay found out and he sat me down at the table with the history book, forcing me to repeat the section out loud over and over. I remember being so uncomfortable. I said, "These poor people, please don't make me do this anymore." He replied saying, "No. Not these poor people, read it again." And kept me up until 2 a.m. until I was finally desensitized. He tried to install in my head that people of color, especially black people, were all thieves, liars, abusers, and couldn't be trusted. I couldn't fathom that, even in early high school. This made no sense since Jay had a friend who's black, and I was best friends with his daughter who was also black. So why was Jay trying to make me racist? I'm not sure to this day, but I hear using heroin steroids make people act irrational. So maybe that was it? My mom packed up her things and left Jay when I was 13. It was the happiest memory of my childhood. No camera in my room. Nobody was putting their hands on me. It was nice. It didn't last long though. Jay wormed his way back with my mom, even though she promised me he wouldn't. I remember the sinister look on his face when he was carrying his bags in, looking at me like he won. We eventually moved back into his house, putting me right back into that prison. The rage in me began to boil, and I started to rebel. Friends at school started to question why I was never allowed to hang outside of school, or why they weren't allowed at my house. I told them I'd ask, and I did. Jay told me no, without a reason, and I did the one thing I wasn't supposed to. I asked, why not? I showed up to school with a busted bottom lip, and when my friend asked me what happened I confessed that Jay beat me. She seemed shocked that a parent would even do that to a child, asking me why. I told her that I asked why not, and he didn't like that. She went home and told her mom, to which her mom called CPS. I don't remember CPS ever talking to me personally, or even seeing them come over. My mom made me sit in my room the whole time and told me to not make a noise, so I obeyed until she told me I could come out. Turns out my mom and Jay were telling child services, my teachers, friends' parents, and all my counselors that I am too mentally handicapped to even think for myself, and I'm known to be a pathological liar with a wild imagination and not to believe anything that comes out of my mouth, all while using my ADHD and autism diagnosis as proof to their claims. They both kept me small, uneducated, and brainwashed so they could cover up their crimes, leaving the victim voiceless with no foundation to build their own reputation. Because who would believe a mentally handicapped, pathological liar? When I was 14, Jay randomly came to me in distress. He told me that my mom was planning on leaving him again, and he needed my help to keep our family together. He kept me on the couch and told me that my mom was sick, and that I needed to call 911 and tell them she abuses me, so she can be taken to a facility to get help. Don't you want us to be a happy family? We can be if you do this. Your mom is sick, she just needs help, and you can help her. When I said no again and tried to go to sleep, he grabbed me and kept me there for hours begging me, repeating the same things over and over until I saw the sun about come up. I said yes because I had school, and I got zero sleep. He provided me a phone to use at school, and he told me what to say. I did make that call. I told 911 that my mom was abusing me, and that she needed help. I was going to tell them about Jay too, but every time I would nobody believed me. I had nothing left in me, and a part of me already knew he'd lie his way out of it, so why even waste my energy? My mom spent 5 months in jail. Jay expected to get custody of me, but I went right to my grandma. She and the rest of the family made sure I knew how shitty of a person I was. I tried telling them all about her and Jay, but they didn't believe me. They were more upset that I snitched on my mom and ruined her life. My grandma found out I was self-harming, so she went into a mental breakdown, and put a knife to my arm, and told me to go ahead and do it. Being in my grandma's custody for sure made me understand why my mom had so many issues. I got away as soon as I was able. I don't have any pleasant memories from my childhood, and as I got older I slowly went no contact with my mom and grandma. I haven't spoken to Jay since I was 18, but have gotten an email from him when I was 21. I didn't reply. I've spent the last year and a half writing everything down that's happened so my story isn't just collecting dust, a forever voiceless child, and this was just half of what happened, but this is already way too long. This man and the way he treated me has left permanent mental and physical damage to me. I suffer from major depressive disorder, severe anxiety, OCD, and CPTSD. I have to take medication and do therapy for the rest of my life to cope with what he did, and he's out there living his best life, with his own business, his own family of boys, and is thriving only because his crimes have reached the statute of limitations for child abuse. There's nothing I can do, and I'll never get justice. All I can do is live my life how it was meant to be, keep taking my meds, and go to therapy. Until then, I sure hope our justice system changes its ways. A lot of victims such as myself will never receive justice all because a certain amount of time has passed, but do they put situations like Stockholm Syndrome or brainwashed children into consideration? No. There shouldn't be a limit on crime, especially against children. Just because time has passed doesn't mean a crime wasn't committed and doesn't mean a child didn't suffer. And change needs to happen. Thank you for reading, and I'm sorry for the lengthy post. Update. I didn't expect to write another update. When I posted before, I honestly believed that was the end of the story, not emotionally, but legally. I had already accepted the idea that justice wasn't coming. Everyone told me the same thing: too much time had passed, there wasn't enough proof, and people like Jay rarely face consequences unless they're caught in the act. So I focused on survival instead. Therapy. Medication. Learning how to exist without constantly feeling like I was about to be punished for breathing wrong. But something shifted after I wrote everything down publicly. You guys made me realize I can still do some things. For the first time in my life, I stopped softening the truth. Before that, whenever I talked about my childhood, I watered it down. I'd call it strict parenting or a rough upbringing. I avoided details because I was conditioned to believe nobody wanted to hear them, or worse, that saying them out loud would somehow make me the bad person again. After the post, people started reaching out privately. Survivors. Old classmates. Even people I barely remembered. Some messages were just support, but a few were different. A few people said they remembered things about my house that never sat right with them. Things they didn't understand as kids but understood now. At first I thanked them and moved on. I still believed nothing could actually happen. Then one night I snapped. It wasn't dramatic. No yelling, no breakdown. Just exhaustion. I was in therapy earlier that day talking about accountability, about how my entire childhood revolved around protecting the people who hurt me. I realized I was still doing it. Even now, even as an adult, I was protecting their reputations by staying quiet publicly about specific details. I went home and started telling the full story. Not vague statements. Not careful wording. Everything. I described the camera in my room. The beatings. The manipulation. The forced isolation. The false narratives they built around my diagnoses to discredit me. I explained how Jay coached me into making that 911 call against my own mother. I explained how adults around me were systematically convinced I was unreliable so no one would investigate further. I posted it where everyone could see: extended family, old neighbors, people from school, people who knew Jay as the great guy running his business. I expected backlash. Instead, someone listened. 3 days later, I received a message request from a woman whose name I didn't immediately recognize. She introduced herself as a mandated reporter who had worked in child advocacy years ago, and she remembered me. Not personally, but my case. She said parts of my story sounded familiar because concerns had been raised back then but never substantiated. She asked if I was willing to talk. I almost didn't respond. Every part of me assumed it would go nowhere again. But something told me to try one last time. That conversation changed everything. She explained something I didn't know. While certain charges have statutes of limitations, not all crimes involving children are treated equally, especially when new evidence or patterns emerge. My public post, combined with specific allegations like surveillance of a minor and coercion, triggered mandatory reporting requirements once she became aware of it. Within 2 weeks, investigators contacted me. I remember shaking so hard during that first interview that I thought I'd throw up. My brain kept expecting disbelief. I kept waiting for the moment they'd look at me the way adults used to, skeptical, dismissive, already convinced I was exaggerating. It never came. They listened. Patiently. Carefully. They asked detailed timeline questions. They already had records I didn't know still existed, old CPS reports, school incident logs, prior complaints that had been closed but archived. What I didn't know was that my story wasn't isolated. As investigators began reopening inquiries, other people started coming forward. A former neighbor reported hearing repeated violent incidents years ago but never knowing what to do. A childhood friend's parent admitted they had suspected abuse but were reassured by my mother and Jay that I had behavioral disorders that caused episodes. Even more shocking, someone connected to Jay's extended family reported concerning behavior involving control and intimidation toward another child years later. That established a pattern investigators couldn't ignore. The investigation snowballed. For months, I lived in a strange limbo. Interviews, statements, therapy sessions intensified because memories I'd buried were suddenly being examined under a microscope. It was exhausting and terrifying, but for the first time I wasn't alone carrying the truth. Then came the arrests. I got the call early in the morning. I thought it was spam at first. When the detective told me both Jay and my mother had been taken into custody pending charges related to child abuse, coercion, unlawful surveillance, and child endangerment, I didn't react the way I imagined I would. I didn't feel victorious. I just sat there, completely still. It felt unreal, like hearing about strangers instead of the two people who shaped my entire reality growing up. The news spread fast. Their neighbors found out. Their business clients found out. People who had defended them publicly started distancing themselves overnight. The same community that once praised them began asking how they missed the signs. There wasn't a dramatic public shaming orchestrated by me. It happened naturally once facts became public record. Court documents don't carry emotion, just evidence, and that was enough. The image they spent years building collapsed almost instantly. Some relatives who once called me a liar tried reaching out to apologize. I'm not ready for those conversations yet. Through all of this, one of my closest friends stepped in more than anyone else. He didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. He showed up with food when I forgot to eat. Sat with me during panic attacks without trying to fix them. Let me stay at his place during especially hard weeks when memories felt too loud to handle alone. I think that's when it finally hit me, what support is supposed to look like. No control. No fear. No conditions attached. The legal process is still ongoing, so there are limits to what I can say publicly, but charges were formally filed. Hearing that word, charges, felt heavier than anything else. For years I believed what happened to me existed only in my head, something unprovable and invisible. Now it exists in official records. Justice doesn't feel like revenge the way people imagine. It doesn't erase anything. I still have CPTSD. I still take medication. I still wake up some nights expecting punishment that never comes. But something fundamental changed. I'm not the voiceless child anymore. For most of my life, silence was survival. Speaking meant danger. Speaking meant consequences. Speaking meant nobody believing me. This time, I spoke, loudly, clearly, without protecting anyone, and someone finally listened. And that was enough to start everything.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update for more such stories.